Cool. It worked. Last time it broke. All right,
Good luck,
everyone.
John.
Live here with Tyler Hayes, CEO, Adam Limbs, an old friend. I mean, when was it was 2014? So that was what, 6 years ago?
Yeah. Six
When we
whole
met.
years.
When we met
In Kansas City.
In Kansas City, it was the beginning. It was it March? So it was cold. We were both living in. I know you were up in San Francisco. I was living in Southern California. And
two California boys go to Kansas.
And it was cold, and we met there. I remember I wanted to start with this story because it was kind of a funny one, or an interesting one. I remember so we're at Techstars. It's 2014. You're sitting, we have all the little tables, right? And you're sitting in front of me, so I can see, all I can stare at all day is like your huge 27-inch like iMac. And it was like, it was like a late night, like probably like a Tuesday, like randomly. And you were watching the Interstellar trailer.
Oh, yeah. Okay. No, I remember this. Yeah.
Do you remember this? And it was just like, I remember you watching it with like these headphones on, and I just like, my eyes just went over, and I was like, what in the hell is he watching over there? This looks like the dopest movie I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah. I remember what happened after this too.
I don't know if I do.
What happened after this?
I don't know if I do.
Okay, so you saw it, and then you came over, and you're like, "What is that?" I can't believe I remember this. And then, if you remember, at the front of the building, inside there was the huge indoor screen, the theater screen.
Oh.
And you were like, "Let's put it on the theater screen." And then we took over the speakers and the theater screen for the whole place. So everyone in the building had to watch the Interstellar trailer with us. And what was the music? It was that song, Evie Reborn from V for Vendetta.
Yes. Yeah. I remember listening to that entire soundtrack from that film, and it was like Hans Zimmer had just absolutely crushed it. And it was just, I don't know, there was something about that film that was like, it was futuristic, but it wasn't. It was believable. You know, it was just a taste, I think, of like what you potentially thought the real future could be. There was the science side to it.
Right.
Which I thought was awesome, which kind of encapsulates, I think, you a little bit in the way that you think about the future, and the way that, you know, and we'll talk all about some of the other stuff. And I listened to one of your other podcasts you did about this, which I thought was awesome. But, you know, I want you to talk a little bit about why, you know, first just tell us what Adam Limbs is, right? Like I did a little bit of research, like amazing. I think it's awesome what you're doing, but just tell everyone a little bit about, you know, what you're doing, what it is, why you're doing it.
Yeah, at Adam Limbs. It's really easy to explain, but it's very hard to tell someone it's real unless you see it. We make mind-controlled bionic arms. And yes, they're 100% real. Every part of it. The mind control is real. The bionic is real. The arm is real. It's all real. And you and I probably talked about this 6 years ago when we first met, you know, working on very different things. But I have always I've always wanted to live forever myself. And I've always wanted to also relatedly cure death. Because like death and permanent injury just seem like these really outdated concepts to me. And so basically saw this, this is a much longer story, but the punchline here is, over the last 10 years, there's this arm that was in research at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and had taken in $100 million in funding from DARPA. I saw some videos of this thing and reached out to them after we sold our last company to Amazon. And I was like, hey, do you need help kind of taking this thing to market? And then we fell in love, got married, and we put together a team. We're helping them bring this arm to market. And so kind of all these things coalescing of this really incredible technology, bringing together our own team of veterans from Silicon Valley, from Apple and Intuitive Surgical and NASA and stuff. And then obviously trying to make human body 2.0 and cure death. Legitimately first stab towards, let's make a new human body so you don't have to worry about yours falling apart anymore.
Okay, so many things in there. What does you know, a marriage between Johns Hopkins and you kind of finding this and going after it, what does that entail? How does that work? Because I don't think a lot of people really understand it. You know, we have we're looking at government grants, but for governments that are outside, not the United States, it seems like it's very difficult within the United States to find these grants, these things. How does that work with? I mean, Johns Hopkins, they develop this, they go through it, and then you guys try and commercialize it and kind of carry the ball forward.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It can get pretty dry really easily. The process itself is called tech transfer, which is just sort of this dry process of, getting the patents and the IP and the copyright and all that, and working with the teams to make sure that the technology goes from the research institution to the commercial partner.
Yeah.
But what's cool about it, what's exciting, so like kind of what you're getting at, how do you get money for these things? Like, how do you actually bring something like this into the world? Because it's not like you and I can go down the street and be like, oh, there's some technology that I knew was brought out of a university. There's some technology I knew. It's not a normal thing to just hear things that are brought out of universities into the world.
Right.
And the reason for that is it's very difficult, it takes a lot of time, and it's hard to get the money to bridge the gap. And so like in Silicon Valley, what does everyone do when they start a company? Well, they go get venture capital. Well, venture capital doesn't really work with the tech transfer industry. They're kind of almost allergic to each other a little bit. And so government grants actually are a great method to bridge that gap. So we, for example, go for US government grants, not other governments, though we probably would in the future. But I think if anyone new stepped into this kind of industry today and they were like, how do I go get money from the government for this? I would say, don't go read a bunch of blog posts. Don't try to work with a bunch of partners. Ask like one person who's done it and done it well, what they did, and they'll be able to take a year's worth of explaining it and put it into like 20 seconds, which is basically, there's two immediate types of grants you can go for: SBIR and STTR. TT is in tech transfer.
Gotcha.
SBIR is more colloquially known as America's Seed Fund. So it's sort of the government saying, here's seed funding for things. And in these two different paths you can go, they both allow you to do either a phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 type project with small, medium, and large amounts of money and small, medium, and large amounts of proof. And you can either do phase 1 right away, or you can jump straight to phase 2. You could do phase 1 and then phase 2. But the point of all this is to say, if you wanted to do what I did and if you saw some really cool video on YouTube, let's say of some mind-controlled drone, not a mind-controlled arm, but a mind-controlled drone, and you saw a video of this thing, you would call the organization. Step 1, call the organization that makes it and say, hey, I'm interested in commercializing this with you. Step 2, start the process of just talking with them about how do you want to do it? How do I want to do it? See if you share the same kind of crazy. Step 3, when you figured out you share the same kind of crazy, go through all the standard legal stuff. Step 4, probably spend a year working directly with them to get their knowledge transferred over to your organization. Maybe even some of their team embeds into your team. And then after that, you had the standard kind of startup steps after that, product market fit and going to market and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, there's a lot. It just seems like it's such a difficult problem to solve with the arm. And it's like, that is a government related. It's kind of like, I don't think people know that like the cordless drill was developed by NASA, right? Because you can't have a cord out in space and try,
right.
I'm carry this cord with me too, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of innovation, I think, that happens within the lines of the government that people might not realize or have access to. I mean, what division of the government is this that even funds this?
Well, so this was funded by DARPA, which is, DOD basically.
So it's DOD. Okay.
Yeah. And so this specific program was called Revolutionizing Prosthetics 2009. Started in 2005. They called it 2009 because they thought they'd be done in 4 years. Obviously, that did not happen.
No.
And they basically said, DARPA said, hey, everyone, we've got $120 million. We want to award this to anyone who thinks they can make a lifelike arm that they can give to war fighters returning home from war who've lost their limbs, as well as civilians. And there really wasn't anything even close at that point. I mean, in 2005, like robotics was nowhere near human scale to that level. That's why they kind of had to do that. And there are many other organizations in the government that do this stuff, but this one was DARPA for a reason. I don't think you would see like NSF or NIH putting $100 million into a lifelike robotic arm. Theirs would be like therapeutics or drug discovery or stuff like that.
So why do you think they chose the arm?
At the time, I think it was on trend. I mean, the government is on trend just like everyone else. So like right now, they're not really funding robotic arms or robotics that much. They're funding AI and any number of things that are popular right now. Back then it was robotics or drones. Yeah.
And it just seems like such a fundamental piece that, it's like if you were going to ask someone like, hey, I know it's tough to think about, but like, hey, if you had to lose like your leg or your arm, I think most people would choose the leg, like 100%, right? Just because it's so much more simple to replace. Just like like just grabbing something and like thinking about that. I mean, that seems like such a difficult problem. I mean, because you said mind controlled, but it's really just, I mean, what's the signal? Like, how does it actually work? I mean, some people are like, they're lost down just below the elbow. Some people are lost a little bit higher. Like there's different pieces there. So how are you starting to think about how that kind of interfaces?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. But, yeah.
Like we just do it. We have a team, and then
So basically, it's AI. No. Yeah. Well, to the first thing you said, yeah. I mean, I would totally rather lose a leg than an arm, right? I think that's totally true because an arm is really a hand, and a hand is so much more complex. And I don't mean to diminish the value of having a prosthetic leg. I think if you lose your leg, that's a horrible experience. It's traumatic. No one wishes that on anyone. But it is just mechanically easier to recreate a leg than it is to recreate an arm because the arm is really a hand. You know, all this fine control. And that's why we hadn't had robotic hands to this point until now. So, yeah, I mean, you'd rather lose a leg. You'd rather lose neither. But the reality is, especially as we move forward, people actually have a lot of issues that cause them to consider even electively amputating, and they sort of don't right now just because the technology isn't good enough to replace it. Like just people, for example, who have nerve damage, or like people who get their arm or leg crushed, but they can't amputate it for like balance reasons, or just because it costs money, so there's it's actually much larger amount of people, I think, who would, if we truly had an arm or a hand that was as good as a human arm and hand, would just say, rip mine off, give me this one instead. It's kind of a crazy thought.
I was thinking about that. I went for a run this morning. I was like, what other thing, what can I ask Tyler, like outside of 1,000 things? And I was like, do you think that this could get to a point at some point where, I mean, it is just better? Like it would be better, just kind of like a Neuralink type thing. You're like, I wouldn't even think for 2 seconds. It's like, even as like a baby, someone's like, all right, put that thing in. Like, that's like getting your immunity shot for chicken pox. Like, could it be better at some point where like the first sign of like injury, someone's like, okay, what, like, how old were you when you replaced that? It's like, oh, I did it around 30 or I did it around 40, or someone's like, man, I knew it was better. I just did it at like 18.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a matter of if, it's definitely a matter of when, because you can just look at how things have trended over time. So, hundreds of years ago, Leonardo da Vinci created his like sketch of a mechanical man and didn't even create it mechanically. And then 100 years ago, we had, in the Civil War era, and 100 years ago, we had these sort of body-powered prostheses. I don't know if you've seen these, but these are so, oh man, they're the worst. It's like literally, like if you want to open and close your hand, there's a cable that runs up your arm to your shoulder, and as you move your shoulder forward or backward, it opens and closes your hand like a pulley.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what we had up until like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And then we finally had the first computer-aided prosthetics, but not really. It was still basically body-powered, but just kind of better looking. And then 20 years ago, we had this breakthrough, which was the myoelectric era of prostheses, which was now we finally could put computer chips inside of arms, and we could use electrodes to listen to your muscle activity. So if you physically flex your bicep or tricep, if you flex your bicep, it flexes the elbow. If you flex your tricep, it extends the elbow. And like that's where we were basically until our arm. And that begs the question then, it's like, how do you move a hand and fingers with that type of control, where there's an electrode on your bicep and one on your tricep? Well, literally what you do is you press a button on the arm to switch it from elbow mode to grip mode. And then you flex your bicep to rotate one direction through the grips. And you flex your tricep to rotate the other direction through the grips. And there's about 10 to 20 grips. There's like a pinch grip, a grasp, and that's it. That's how prosthetics exist today. That's like the most advanced prosthetic today. So anyway, then you have ours now, which is, full finger dexterity, full arm and hand and finger control, and it's intuitive. You don't have to physically awkwardly flex and do a CrossFit, workout every day just to move your arm. But like, for example, I mean, you're a pretty strong guy. Do you know how much you can bicep curl, like just with one arm?
No, it's been 6 years, Tyler. No, I'm still a lot. I mean, I probably, like, without injury, like, to feel comfortable. I mean, I could probably do like a 40-pound weight, like feeling pretty comfortable. Yeah. But anything above that would be like, like, unless you had a balance on the other side, like, you'd be like, that's not a lot. I mean, you've been injured.
Yeah, same. I mean, I could maybe do 30, 35. And like, and then there's max versus, a whole set. So our arm can bicep curl 45 pounds.
Yeah. Which is like a very strong person.
Right. And so it's already better in some ways. Yeah. No. By the way, I don't have the arm here right now, but I do have something.
Yeah. I was gonna say, grab something we can look at.
Here we go. So the arm is at the lab right now, so I don't have the actual arm with me. But so you were asking about, like, how do you control it?
Yeah.
So this is called a myoband. This has electrodes on the inside. They're EMG electrodes, just like your doctor would use to listen to your signals in your body.
EMG or EKG? EMG? Is there a different?
EMG.
There's different?
Yep. Electromyography.
Myography. Okay.
So basically the signals in your muscles themselves. So you have the way it works, whether you're an amputee or a non-amputee, actually. So you, Joe, could use the arm right now too. So what you do is you take this band, you slip it on, and then now when you think, the signals travel down your nerves normally. If you're an amputee, you still have those nerves. They're just like wires inside your body with electrical signals. They run down. The band now hears those signals emanating through your muscles actuating, then sends those signals over to the robotic arm, which uses AI to intuitively move. And so that's how you're able to get such fine level control and in real time. To your point about, can it be better and how is it even possible?
Yeah. And so what stage are you guys at? I mean, obviously they had built the arm. They spent a ton of time and effort putting this thing together. Now you're towards, is it like prototyping or like commercialization? Like, is that the strategy to kind of think about commercialization, and that's kind of informing a little bit of what the prototype looks like? Where exactly are you in the journey right now?
Yeah. It's, do you remember AC Propulsion, the company that Tesla originally was with the prototype?
Yeah, for sure.
So think of it sort of like the stage that AC Propulsion was at right when they became Tesla, when Elon came in. So sort of like they had a prototype. It's a really good prototype. It's even been used by a lot of people, but it needs to be made into an actual product at this point. So in our case, we have a prototype that's been used by, about 20 people in clinical trials, and one guy took it home for a whole year. I mean, he beat the crap out of the thing. Now it is time to make it into a product. In broad strokes, that means things like, an industrial design that looks like a human arm, not a black cylinder.
Right.
It means reduce the cost in a lot of stuff, and not just through volume, but actually, say, hey, here are actuators and gearboxes and stuff from 5 or 10 years ago. There's newer, cheaper ones now. Just put those in instead. And it is, even though it's been, in clinical trials use with about 20 people, it's a lot of user feedback and a lot of, just like you do with any product, just literally all day, every day testing with people and putting it through all the paces, because it has to be attached to your body. I mean, there's a very high bar for these products. You can't, sort of like being a pilot or a lawyer, like there's not really room for error. You can't screw up with this stuff, and so we need people to be using it all day, every day, and testing it out for safety, for security.
I think you're kind of holding yourself to that bar, which I think is important, which is, kind of like Tesla of, I think that one of the best, examples is like the solar roof, right? Like, I worked for a like building materials company at one point, and, it was like, they're like, we can't figure it out. You can't do it. You can't make you can't make a roofing shingle look like a solar panel. It's not possible. Or at least they're like, it's not possible yet. Right. And Elon thought, well, no one wants to put these stupid, huge things on top of their house. I have one. It looks like shit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, and making it beautiful. And so I think like maybe that's part of the reason why maybe someone's like, I don't want that thing. I don't want someone looking at me, and they forget the human element of emotion when it comes to like your arm or anything that's on you. And they're just like, well, it's easier to hide maybe if I don't have something there, or, you know, it's just like, there's those things that if you're thinking about that in the design, that's going to change everything, right? If it's beautiful and it's functional, and it's like, it sounds like that's the direction that you're pushing this.
Could have said it better myself. Yeah. 100%. I don't think that level of thinking exists today in the industry. I think you don't need to be into the prosthetics industry or into bionics to know that they don't look great. Like, we've all kind of seen them in the world. We also know that we see a lot of people not wearing them, which is sort of an indicator that they're probably not that great. Like, why would someone choose to not have a leg or an arm?
Right. Even if it's maybe 12% helpful, right? Or 15% helpful. Maybe it's not the best thing, but they're choosing to not have that 12% because of the human side of it, is what's happening, it sounds like.
I think I shared this, you know, publicly already in a couple places, but like, there's this really damning statistic about only 1 out of 5 arm amputees using a prosthetic, and 4 out of 5 leg amputees use one. So why is it that 80% of leg amputees use one, but only 20% of arm amputees use one? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's because they're not good enough. They don't look good. They can't do much. And then, man, I learned this super like damning joke in the industry. I went to an amputee conference last year, and I met like about 1,000 amputees over a few days. And I talked to a lot of arm amputees, and like half of them minimum weren't wearing one. And of the ones who had one, they like were literally carrying it sometimes, not even wearing it. And so I started asking people, like, why, what is going on here? What I get that the statistic exists, but like, why even at a conference are you not kind of showing off your arm? Or like, why isn't there that sort of, you know, camaraderie that exists of people, you know, in your sort of local environment? You know, you go to a car show or a car conference, like, people really show off their cars. Like, why are not people showing off their prosthetics here? And man, what I heard this from probably at least 5 or 6 people. There's literally a joke in the industry. Arm amputees will be like, oh yeah, no, I have an arm prosthetic. It's pretty sweet. It's in the closet. Let me get it for you. I was like, oof, that's not good.
Tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah. So they're not thinking about it. And these are like billion-dollar corporations, by the way, that make these prosthetics today. And this is the standard somehow.
I want to talk a little bit about that, like startup versus corporation. And I think a lot of people that are working at a corporation today or work at a big business might not realize, and for me, kind of, and I don't know how much you've done it over the last couple of years, but I have hopped from startup into big corporate world back to startup, and like I've done that a little bit in my career. And the one thing that I've noticed is just the only competitive advantage a startup has is like speed of decision making. Like that's it. And there's absolutely, especially having worked in like automotive a little bit, and which is now just mobility with like there's like the Fords and the GMs and the Chryslers type people of the world that are actually competing against like the Ubers and Lyfts of the world. And those worlds have kind of merged over the last 10 years. And there's absolutely no reason that Uber should exist. Not with Ford and GM and billions of excess and they're used to innovation too, but they're used to innovation in one straight line. And I always I remember, never forget Doug Lambert told me this. He goes, our company's month is another company's year. And it's because you can make decisions quickly, and Uber can make 50 decisions. They can ship product 28 times in a month, where a big corporation could just literally set up one meeting. Like, hey, we'll just get this one meeting set up, and that meeting gets delayed like a week meanwhile. And so how are you thinking about that, kind of navigating these? Because I know in that space, I mean, at least, there's kind of pharma, which is adjacent, but like within some of those kind of R&D and those big companies, I mean, are you thinking about competition? I mean, do you just have access to this, and it's like, hey, we're pushing forward. Like, we're the only ones that have access to commercialize this thing.
I mean, 100% we think about competition. But I think first, in broad strokes, startups just shouldn't index on competition, because if you do anything worthwhile, you're going to have competition. It's just going to happen. And B, if you focus on your competition, you're focusing on the wrong thing, which is your customers and your own philosophies. And then specifically with us, I just think the hand that we've been dealt is the incumbents that exist in this industry have chosen to not innovate. They consciously, outwardly, explicitly have said, we're not really going to innovate. The only way we're going to innovate is through acquiring startups to innovate. Okay, that's interesting. That's one way to do it. But that's a really slow and hard pace of innovation. And so we consciously came in and said, yeah, we're not going to do that, right? Like, we're not going to try to aim for some kind of exit with an incumbent, because then we know the moment we get acquired by them, we're going to die because they're going to set the tone internally for us. And so we basically just said, everything that they do, we're doing the opposite. Just like, they want to make commodity products. We're going to make luxurious, no compromises, high-end products. They want to focus on, really slow innovation over 5 years. We're going to release a product every year. They want to focus on being, really medical and not listening to the patient so much as the doctor, and just kind of getting money from insurance. Whereas we said, even if insurance isn't going to, guarantee that they'll reimburse it up front, we're going to do what we know is right and is best. And we're going to make the product that we know people really want, because we know that if we make the best product, and then we have an army of amputees who want that, and quadriplegics and other people outside of those industries, clinicians and prosthetists, as well as roboticists, if they all want that, then insurers will say, okay, well, we're going to reimburse it. We have to reimburse it. When you have 10,000 amputees banging down your door saying, look, this is the thing, this is the best thing, then that gives us a lot more ability to navigate the space. And to your point, it's use your weaknesses as a strength. If you're small, then you're more nimble. If you don't have as many team members, you can be a little bit more stealthy and quiet. And like, for example, we were private about this for like 1.5 years, which is like super, me, that's like super, almost anathemic to me. Like, I love to build in public. Like, not saying anything for 1.5 years was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life by far.
I mean, I could see it like seeping out of you through Twitter, just like those little kind of cryptic, like, this is done. You're like, anyway, you're like, well, if I'm general about it, I could talk about it. So I still need to talk about something. And so I could just kind of feel it kind of coming out of you, which is, I think that's important. But I mean, I think that's why you're in the position you are, is because you're trying to push this forward in a very public way that would create a narrative, would create a story, and people attached to stories. And that's what you need, is the story of these people that have, been kind of down and out with respect to innovation and technology in this space. I think about, how much we've innovated in other spaces, in our country, and how much money we've spent on certain things. And, especially something tied so closely, I think, to vets, and it's like, what was there, like, out of the beta testers, or I don't know if you kind of call it like the beta testers or prototyping over that year. I mean, were a lot of these people like veterans of like Army, Navy, or anything? I mean,
yeah, I don't remember the exact proportion. I think it's about half and half. It's about half were veterans and half were civilians. One was actually PBS NewsHour anchor. Miles O'Brien was one of them, and he made a segment about it. He's not at NewsHour anymore, but he gave it. I give him a ton of credit, because he lost his arm, awful experience, and then he not only made a segment about it, but he used the arm himself, during the segment. He really put himself out there. So I think that was really cool of him to do that. The thing with veterans and with the VA is, the VA is actually a pretty wonderful healthcare system. Like, if you're a veteran, they basically say, like, look, if you need care, we'll give it to you. Now, they have a lot of issues, no doubt. I mean, a lot of big systems just do in general. But I would also give them a lot of credit for just kind of saying, if you lost an arm in a war, we'll give you as many arms as you need. We'll give you 5 prosthetics, whatever it takes. And so that is really cool. But when you don't have manufacturers and companies designing great products to start, they're not getting delivered the products that they need. And so that's where that gap comes from. And to kind of dovetail with the point you mentioned earlier about, like, why do we have reusable rockets and electric cars, both of which are amazing things and I want them, but we don't have bionic arms? You know, we're spending billions of dollars on things, and you know, take away even like the good things like that, like, you know, war, depending on your thoughts, just tons of money going into that, but also the billions and billions of dollars going into Facebook ads every day. Again, I like toys to exist in the world and I want a general innovation, but clearly the scales are a little off here. Like at some point, and actually I think sort of never, we never really actually invested in innovation as much as we thought. I think that's kind of a story we tell ourselves, especially in this country. I think there is a lot that comes from the government, but like even NASA, for example, like the NASA budget every year is basically like $20 billion, which is one WhatsApp acquisition by Facebook. That's the annual NASA budget.
Yeah, for like 12 people also, by the way.
Right, yeah. You know, it took the biggest the budget's ever been for NASA was during the Apollo program. It was about $50 billion a year. And so if you take the entire operating budget over time of NASA since its inception, it's still less than like the valuation of all of the FANG companies right now. So it's weird that we think that we spend a lot of money on these things when we don't. And I think that we need to really, we need to get people in these spaces to think about these things. And there are a lot of very smart, very passionate people out there who want to do this stuff. Tesla is such a fantastic example in its early days. I mean, you know, Martin and Elon and that whole team just saying, there is a massive pile of dead bodies on the floor of electric cars. Like, I mean, you remember that movie in the 90s, Who Killed the Electric Car?
I don't.
There was this documentary that was made in the late 90s or early 2000s called Who Killed the Electric Car? And it was this really damning documentary because Ford and Chevy and everyone had tried making electric cars, and Toyota and Honda and everyone. And basically in the US, a number of parties ranging from the government to traditional corporate interests to crony capitalistic interests lobbied with billions of dollars to get electric cars killed. And that's why electric cars sort of started happening in the 90s and then died. It was literally a very explicit movement by people with a lot of money that to just kill it. And when Elon and the Tesla team came out and said, you know, look, we're going to do this. That's why I don't think people remember this. Back then, no one believed they were going to pull it off. And everyone criticized them for their approach specifically too, of saying, we're going to make a luxurious, no compromises, exotic sports car first, not a commodity car that everyone can buy. And everyone's like, well, where are you going to get the volume? How are you going to do this? You know, and I think they were really, really smart for doing that. They came out with the boldest possible statement, said, if we start with a car that people just want and lust after in general, because it looks good and it's attractive and it goes fast, and then we say, by the way, it's electric, then they want it. And they nailed it. And it's hard. It was really hard. And they barely threaded that needle. But
it was a little inverse.
Didn't do that.
It was inverse than what you would. And I think that's what they've done well, is everything seems to be a little inverse, right? They don't have a marketing budget. They're not out there plowing, you know, $70-80 million a year into banner ads, which is like just beyond like my comprehension for why companies are doing things like this, right? Or pumping them into Facebook ads that people actually aren't seeing, right? And it's just a different way to think about building a business. And I think I like the point you made about, you know, a good example would be, you know, I love sports and like I love football. I love all of these things. They just had like released and then showed the brand new LA Rams stadium, right? It's like, I think the stadium itself was like $2 billion, the land around it, $5 billion, somewhere in the $2 to $5 billion range. I think it's going to be $5 billion once it's all said and done. And we're now remote learning everywhere in California. I mean, how many iPads could we have bought to give to kids at home and increased internet speeds? You know, it's just the priorities. And so that's why when it comes to startups and then sales, right? It's like, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to even do something good, you still need to sell, right? You still need to the innovation needs to get into the mainstream. So you need to make it cool. And so I think that's like a very tough line to kind of balance, especially if you're trying to build something that you're trying to do good with, right? But you're also saying, I still need to go out and sell this thing. And sometimes selling to people feels unnatural because they're like, well, I'm just trying to do something good. I just put my head down, I build this thing. But that's not the case. You need to make it cool.
Yeah.
And I feel like Tesla has done that, but it seems like you're kind of taking a page out of their book a little bit, the way you're thinking about this.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think we're lucky. We're fortunate that they had charted that path, so at least some people kind of get that. They get the whole Roadster, then Model S, then Model 3 thing. I think.
Like
I
my
still think
my crypto. I got my crypto thing on here. I took the bit.
I didn't want to say anything. Yeah. Oh, look at that. Wait, where
have
mine?
Bitcoin.
Do I not get one of these?
I'll send you a hat.
I'm assuming that's a 10 a.m. beer, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, you gotta fire it up. No, I just like my drinks really cold, so I always have like the koozie, no matter what. I want to just kind of like switch gears a little bit. And I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and you were talking, and this kind of resonated with me a little bit with the investor group of venture capitalists that invest in this type of startup or venture, right? And it kind of resonated with me because being in the crypto space, I kind of went through that, especially at the beginning with, you'd go talk to people and they'd be like, well, I thought this crypto thing was like over with. Like, I thought Bitcoin was done, and like they were just completely missing this huge subset of people that were so passionate and had been wildly building for the last year and knew that this was going to be the next big thing. And so you have to kind of just write off, like, you have to try to meander and find your way to this kind of smaller subset of people that are really excited about, what you're doing. And so how did you figure that path out, and how do you find some of those people, and what are those people like that are the ones that end up, I liked how you kind of said, like, you both have the same type of crazy. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. So like, but how do you find those people?
Well, the easiest way is to just put a flagpole on the ground and say, this is what we're doing. And then people who see it, if they just self-elect, but not that many people are probably near your flagpole. So you need to go find them somehow.
Right.
Yeah. Share the crazy has always been my kind of philosophy, for sure. Both in hiring people and hiring investors and all that kind of stuff. With VC specifically, I don't think even people in Silicon Valley know about this that much, because we're so used to, like, VC today in Silicon Valley mostly is synonymous with like invest in software and SaaS products, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like, we don't talk about people who invest in like Cruise, for example, or, anyone else that's doing something, like Planet Labs maybe, except unless they're like a generalist fund, unless they're like Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia or someone, and like, oh yeah, did you hear Sequoia did a deal in Planet Labs? They're like, cool, I guess, right? Like, I just assume they do some of those deals every year. But most people in Silicon Valley seem to not even know that there are these funds specifically for like deep tech or frontier tech or emerging tech. And there's not that many of them. But those are the people to go to if you're doing something that is pretty crazy, like right on the fringe. And it's got some level of hardware and software, maybe some research in it, something from the academic world. I will say this, though. I think even those funds typically only kind of come in around like Series A or B. Like, they don't really do a lot of seed stage unless maybe they knew the founder before, or it was one of those deals they just couldn't let go for some reason. But I think what I would suggest, honestly, to most founders to like find the people who share your crazy for an emerging technology product like this is you probably just need to like hit the streets super hard. And I don't mean run a process of like go raise a round. I mean, build your product in public and try to get as much surface area as you can. And then you'll start to get people, you get the snowball built. To your point, like Tesla doesn't spend $80 million a year on marketing. That doesn't mean they don't do marketing. They just don't do advertising. What they do is create insanely awesome products and then make videos about them. And then the videos just speak for themselves because the products are so cool. And then it resonates with people, and then they do, in-person events where they do launches and stuff like that. Like, that's marketing. But yeah, I I would never be the person who would say, if you build it, they will come. I think that's delusional. Like if you just build a great product, do not expect that people are just going to come find it. You still need to go sell it to people. But it's a pretty simple loop of make a great thing, tell people about it. Make a great thing, tell people about it. And as you do that, if you truly made a great thing that people love, they will start to elect, themselves. Like, I don't know how much I could say, but like, I get DMs, sometimes just from people who are like, hey, can I just like write you a check? Can I invest in your company? Basically, whether it's an angel or it's a VC, like, or just like someone who like saw a video on Facebook or something.
It happens.
Yeah, totally. I don't think there is a clear path for that stuff. And I think that's kind of my point about how much this stuff sucks too. Like, there is a massive gap between getting something prototyped and researched and even trialing it with people and then getting it productized. You really need this like non-dilutive government funding for this first part, because VCs will not fund research. They will not fund prototyping.
Can you imagine trying to start that from the idea paper napkin? Can you imagine?
No way. Yeah,
not possible. I mean, you would imagine. No, I'm saying you'd be diluted to the ground, and you would have nothing left, and you would just be so tired from like just raising money that you wouldn't have been able to focus on the product whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely
not possible.
No. But I mean, I'm curious, even like when you went out and you're talking about this, doing something in the crypto space, and the reaction being, well, I sort of thought that was over. Like that trend is gone now. What's the pushback that you get there? Like, how do you navigate that space?
No, it's still there. There's still a lot of people that are still, I mean, we're still, and that's why I always say with crypto is we're still very early stages with this. And it's a weird industry because, 2 years ago, you could be, in line at FedEx and someone's like, hey man, and like, which one are you buying? And like talking to their friend and they're like talking about crypto. And it just was like a wildfire that just went out across the world. But it was so small just because the way it contracted very quickly and people didn't know what it was. And it was so disruptive or potential. It had the potential to be so disruptive to kind of, just governments in general, and money is such a touchy thing that, it kind of contracted, but then we had this kind of year and a half of people that have just been building cool products and cool financial tools. And, I just kind of talking about listening to one of your other podcasts, we were talking about hacking and people kind of hacking into ARMS or hacking into like Neuralink uses BLE still, like which still I can't believe, like, are we past, like someone have a solve for BLE? Like, are we past this yet? I guess not. But yeah, no. Crypto there's so many different industries that crypto can disrupt. And like, privacy is one of them, identity and all of these things. And we're just at the kind of early stages, but I just think people are so adverse to change. And like you're saying, in the kind of traditional VC model of if they don't understand, a lot of times people are still like, if I don't understand it, I don't invest in it, which I don't understand how like a venture capitalist could survive that way. Cause you're investing in things that you shouldn't understand. And it's like that, I guess that level of trust that comes from meeting people and kind of getting out there. But yeah, it's just I think it's just a different way of thinking about raising is seeing these, like this amazing product that someone else kind of started and then picking the ball up with it. And that's why it's like the government does do a lot of these things. They do invest in innovation. They do a lot of these things. And I think people are always thinking these are bad things, but like you're saying, like $20 billion, that's nothing. Like that's nothing to be investing in something.
People, in Silicon Valley, people think that the only funding source is VC. On the East Coast, people think the only funding source is PE. In the Midwest, people think the only funding source is country club investors. So everyone's got their sort of like bias. And if you step back one level and just abstract it all to just being funding sources, you just say, okay, well, who's the right group for us for the stage we're at right now? And if you're at the researcher prototyping stage for like really advanced frontier technology, and I'm only talking about frontier technology here, not software, not stuff like that, then you probably need someone who can give you non-dilutive funding, the government or maybe a family office or nonprofit or someone. And then to get it to market, you need a combination of that plus maybe VC, PE, whatever else. And then once you have a business running and you're scaling, then sure, VC or, venture debt or whatever. But yeah, the crypto thing with Bitcoin specifically, but really just crypto in general, always kind of made me laugh a little bit, because I was the kind of guy, I mean, you and I talked about this a little bit years ago before we were both super public about our like opinions in this space, and before it was even super, super hot. But I mean, I was literally mining Bitcoin, like whatever it was, like almost 10 years ago. Like I was just that guy who, you know, growing up, I built PCs. I would always have like 5 to 10 different PCs in my basement, you know, just running them at doing different things, running like SETI at home and folding at home, you know, all these sort of like, you know, community contributor projects. Just let your PC run, give it the cycles. And at the time, there was just this crazy thing called Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, that's internet money or something. Like no one really knew what it was back then. Like it's, you know, honestly, no one really knew what it was when it first started. And 100%. A bunch of us were just mining it, right? Just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I was just mining it. And actually, I will share you the greatest horror story in my life that I've never shared publicly. I can't believe I'm about to say this, actually. So you're going to kill me for saying this. So the first business I ever officially started was called Tyler the Techie. And it was a PC repair business. It was like a competitor to Geek Squad. Yeah. And it was super fun. I had a great time doing it right out of college. And that was the first company I ever like sold / gave to someone else, basically, and then moved to San Francisco. But over the time of running that business, I acquired a lot of computer parts and computers that people wouldn't want anymore. So at any given point, I had like 10 PCs that I didn't need. And at one point I started mining, you know, folding at home and Bitcoin and stuff like that. And I kept a bunch of Bitcoin on some external hard drive. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I formatted all my hard drives.
Nice.
And so I don't even know what the amount was that I burned. But at this point, it's probably the single dumbest thing I've ever done in my life, is I definitely burned non-trivial amount of Bitcoin.
You might be responsible for the million missing coins that are out there right now. It's just all you formatted into just, you know, the ether of dark matter.
Yeah, you can blame me. You can get me at you can email me at Satoshi@beatsoutrage.com.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, there's like the pizza story, you know, from many years ago, and I mean, everyone's got a story like that. I mean, I bought, you know, my friend and I had a bunch of Ethereum, and I would just buy him, like we would go get like a burger once a week or something like that. And I would just like send him like, you know, a bunch of Ethereum, like you said, non-trivial, like, you know, to the point where like he felt so bad that like I get to go to USC games for free right now, like, or when they come back, just because it was like, you know, these are just burgers and everything else. But I think that the cool part about that with the space is you had a lot of people, and this is kind of like the democratization of allowing other like normal people to invest in, you know, what I'm starting to call kind of like these micro economies, which each company really is turning into. But you've got, you know, there were younger people who were 14, 15 years old that now are 18 or 19. And I mean, they made $1 million, they made $100,000, they made $50,000. And I think people forget that, yeah, sure, maybe they're not retiring, but $250,000 at like 17 is a much bigger difference than $250,000 at like 61 when you're trying to retire, right? Like the 40-year investment horizon that someone has, even with that 250,000, that could be a retirement completely. I mean, it is at that age. And so it brought this wealth and these different things and this kind of spark of innovation to this younger generation that I think is now out there that is super excited. And when we talk about just the hoops and the different things that you have to go through, and I mean, you know, you're at this point a very seasoned entrepreneur, and I've been through a couple myself, and we know how difficult it is to start something. And it's not just going out and finding the money; it's, you know, that initial leap. You know, you're saying, "Hey, I'm making a good money. I'm trying to start a family. Like, I'm just going to boom. I'm going to jump and do this thing and go take 5 steps back." And that's a very difficult thing for people to do. And I think benefits are a big side of that, right? You're tied to your company. If you leave your company, you don't have benefits, right? Like if you're like you're saying, like if something happens to you and you need this healthcare, now I can't go start a company because I can't go. It's crazy.
Yeah, that only started in, you know, the 1950s too, right? Like people are just oblivious to the history of these things. Like it was not always that way in the US. You know, that was like, that in itself was a reaction to the Great Depression and World War II. And then post World War II, we passed these policies to make sure that people had insurance by attaching it to their employment. And back then, your employment was when you got a job, you kept it your whole life, basically.
Right.
And that's just not the reality. And so, to fight to keep those things now seems just super ignorant, because it's like the context for it is not that it's universal that you should have benefits and tied to your employment, like health insurance tied to your employment. It's just that in a moment that was the right way to do it. So yeah, I 100% agree. I have a friend who he got some amount of money in a bar mitzvah when he was, however old when you are when you do bar mitzvah, and his one of his siblings at the time was just like, you should put all that money into this Apple stock. And he's like, what? He's like, this company, Apple, they make computers. You should put it in Apple stock. And he's like, okay, because his parents were like, you can't spend the money. You need to just like invest it in something.
Mm-hmm.
So he put, let's just, I don't remember the exact amount it was. Let's just call it $10,000, like some bar mitzvah money. He put $10,000 in Apple 20 years ago. Like,
he's looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, he's looking great right now, for sure. But that's so out of the realm of possibility for most people. Like the whole point of, I think, a lot of what I see in decentralized finance and economies is it's not just about the fact that we're trying to make things faster and internet based. It's also like, literally, we need to democratize access, and we need to give more people the ability to do these things. It's absurd to me right now, for example, that unaccredited investors can't invest in startups unless the startup files a Regulation CF crowdfunding campaign with the SEC, and even then they can only raise $1 million in unaccredited money. And anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about here, I just mean like, there's accredited investors who basically the government just says, if you make $300,000 a year or you have more than $1 million in assets, you're accredited, and therefore we allow you to invest in riskier deals like startups. But if you're unaccredited, you just straight up can't. Like, that is gatekeeping.
Think about it is an exact rule that is taking opportunity away from people that have less money. Because literally we're talking about money right now. I'm not like, we don't even need to be like esoteric about it. Like, we're talking about money and investing the money. And if you have more money, you're allowed to invest in these quote unquote, yes, risky assets. But like, Anderson, like you said, Anderson Horowitz is there for a reason. Founders Fund is there for a reason. Like, some of these angel investors are there for a reason. And sure, there's a lot of people that have been burned, but there's also people that are just dying to get access to be LPs to these funds, and they can kind of pick and choose. Why is that? Because it works, right? Like, it works. Like with the Uber example, like it works. Like, investing in people works. And you're saying now we're not going to let these people on the other side, less than $1 million or less than 250,000. Like, there's no one in these categories. They're left behind even more. And so that's what does get me excited. That's why I'm very passionate about crypto is just the opportunity gap will close because of things like this. And I think, the United States they need to tiptoe around some of these things and figure the regulation out, because they are kind of the global currency. They're the world leader in a lot of these stuff, financing activities. People follow their lead, but the rest of the world is just grabbing onto this space, and they're deregulating, and they're allowing people just to run. And sure, there's, it's like the Silicon Valley. It's kind of, what is that term? It's like break things and then kind of like figure it out later.
Break things.
Yeah, move fast and break things. It's like that's the rest of the world is doing that, and we're not doing that here, and that's scary a little bit.
I think so too. I think it's super scary, and I think the point of it is not to be fear mongering, but the point is, hey, we've been coddled a little bit. That's okay. Wake up. America has been the U.S. is a great country. There's a lot of other great countries too, and they're also trying to do things and innovate. And there's no reason why we should slow down for any reason. I think that's kind of the thing that always got me, like, as a kid, was like, why are we doing anything less than breakneck innovation? Like, what's the reason? Someone explain it to me. Like, literally, we have the money, we have the people. There's 7 billion people on the planet. 400 million of them are in the U.S. You're telling me there's not even 1%, even just 4 million of those people in the US who would just elect to be like, I want to work 24/7 as hard as possible, always on the hardest problems. Like, it's absurd. Of course, we could create an entire core of people who want to do this stuff. And yet, we just don't, because the reality is the way the system is constructed, which was about 250 years ago. We, threw off the shackles from a previous country that was oppressing us. We started our own. and then we've passed some amendments to it over time, and it's kind of improved this overall fundamental system a little bit. But like the great experiment, as the US has been called for a couple hundred years, like we've run the experiment at this point. You know what I mean? Like we can start introducing new things to the experiment, and I don't think that we have that mentality as a country yet, though I see a lot of it in like the DeFi space. I see a lot of it in crypto. I see a lot of it in like frontier tech, like Tesla or SpaceX. I hope that we can contribute a lot to that too. And it's this really cool combination, like you're talking about, of like, yeah, I want to legitimately do really cool things. I also want to make it accessible and affordable to people. And I'm not going to do it at anything less than the fastest, hardest possible pace. Like life is short. Let's go do it. That's what makes life fun. And it's kind of strange to me. I don't want to say this too much more, but like it's a little bit of a dig. Like it's kind of strange to me that Silicon Valley isn't the place leading that. Like that's what I thought it was growing up. And I think there is a little bit of that here, but it's largely over-rotated immensely to software and SaaS now because it's so repeatable, it's so predictable. And that's why you have all these, tiny $1 million seed funds and rolling funds and all, whatever the new concept is at any given point. Every person who's an influencer on Twitter now says, I have $1 million fund and I'm investing 25 to 50K checks. They're investing those 25 to 50K checks largely into the same companies of the same people they already knew who are doing, again, software and SaaS products. And I'm not against toys and against cool products, but there is a much larger class of things that are also cool that we could be working on that I call the meaningful fundamentals. Like, let's work on the meaningful fundamentals. People need water, food, shelter, housing, healthcare. They need limbs. They need to not die. Like, there's very cool things you can do in those spaces too, right? Like, we're working on Human Body 2.0. Literally, we're creating a new human body. If you don't think that's cool, I think you're crazy, but I respect that crazy. But like, you can do cool things in these spaces that aren't dry, boring things,
No, I love the rant, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's almost like, you said there's got to be a certain type of crazy. It's almost like I wish that you didn't have to be crazy to do a startup, right? I wish you could just, because you do have to be a little crazy. You have to take a huge risk, and sometimes it's people that have the ability to fall back on something that take these risks, because there's a risk and there's, the chance that you set yourself back 5-10 years, but you might not be like, hey, I'm not going to have like food, water, shelter. Right. But there's certain people that are like, what are you talking about? Startup? What? Like, I'm trying to just like, what are you talking about? I'm trying to like, just figure this job out and figure out my next thing. And that's unfortunate. Yeah. And so like you're saying, there's so much government money that's being used for other things that it's like, why isn't there like a $100 billion fund that anyone can apply to, that we can go through quickly and it gets funded? And it's like you said, non-SaaS software oriented, same old thing that Silicon Valley kind of has on lock and does really well. Let them create those products. But what about these other things, right? That doesn't seem like like hearing you talk about those funds from earlier, I was like, as an entrepreneur that's been now in the game for 10 years, I didn't even know about those things. And I think that that's something that's crazy that other people should know about, because I think there's a lot of people. I mean, I know Google does certain things where it's like, hey, you can work a certain percentage of your time on something else, but are people really doing that? Right. And if they are, like, can they take it to the next level? Because like you're saying, you need to commit fully and 100% if you want to do something. You need to be that crazy to where you're saying, once you commit and you jump, other people are like, whoa, Tyler's really going to go at this full time. Like, this shit's crazy. And then they follow because they believe it's real too.
Yeah, to your point, that it is weird that you have to be crazy to do that. Why is that the abnormal thing? For sure. And also, for example, like I saw Paul Graham tweeting yesterday, and he was tweeting about like, I think he's replying to someone else about like MBAs. And he's basically saying like, MBAs are good if you just want to manage products, but like, they're not good for like driving new product innovation. And I was just kind of like, wait, what? Like, first of all, they absolutely are. Like, startups don't have a lock on all business innovation. There's tons of other industries that exist in the country. Consumer packaged goods, for example, like any number of things that you have in your home right now, all the stuff in your kitchen, in your bathroom, all the products you use, toothpaste, shampoo, silverware, most of those are designed and innovated by like MBAs and the people who work with them, not just MBAs, but the people who work at these companies. I'm sort of like, that was a weird statement. But
what product doesn't have innovation? right? Like what product do you just work on and it stays the same forever? That's like almost like a null statement. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, I think it's a fair point. I think there probably also are like products that just stagnate, and maybe we can make fun of them. But even then, like, so what? They're stagnating. That's their choice, I guess.
Right.
But I think it ties into a larger thing, a larger trend, which is, so like Y Combinator was this really cool concept when it came out. How long ago was that now? Like 15 or 20 years?
At least, yeah.
Yeah. And back then, you know, do you remember how much money they gave people back then?
Is it similar to what it is now, or is it a lot less?
Way less.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. I don't even know if the starting amount was 20K, but after the first year, it was like the first several batches, they got 20K for the team.
Was that still with like, do they do a similar thing where there's like a note on the side too, or?
No. So what happened was it was 20K, and the assumption was you would move to Palo Alto for the summer when you were in school. And for students, sure, 20K is pretty compelling. If you're going to go back to school probably anyway. Cool. And that made sense back then.
Yeah.
But now that's not what we're doing now. What we're doing now is startups are a thing. Everyone understands them. That ecosystem exists. The problem is not, can we fund students for a summer? The problem is, can we fund 2 or 3 people, let's say, who are the right people to work on this in whatever circumstances they require? And it's not just for a summer, because if you're not just a student, you're either leaving a job or you're working at the same time as a job, and you probably can't have a full-time job if you're going to do something like Y Combinator. So you have to leave your job. And if you're leaving your job, circling all the way back to the thing you said earlier, you're giving up your benefits. More importantly, you're giving up your guarantee of a salary and security. And especially in the Bay Area, it just doesn't, the calculus doesn't make sense. It's just so weird to me that we haven't advanced it to the next logical conclusion now, which is, say you have 3 founders, they live in a house together, let's just say, which is probably also unrealistic, somewhere in the Bay Area. They're paying, let's say between 3 of them, just average $1,000 each, $3K a month for rent. So that's $36K a year. That alone is already more than the 20K they originally gave, but they give whatever it is, 120 or 150 now. So that's just rent. Plus then you need food, then the ability to experiment, plus all these other things. Like that's barely enough for 3 people living in the same house to run a 1-year experiment on the thing that they're trying, let alone now introduce the concept of like single parents, people not living together, people who have mortgages they have to pay, people who can't leave their job because that's way too risky. It's just, we haven't kind of fully moved over to the new world with all these conclusions yet, which seems weird to me. And is also kind of why I respect, you know, a lot of this new innovation from people that aren't really being talked about yet in the Bay Area and other places that are like, there's this, I don't even know if there's a word for this concept yet, but there are basically investors now who will just say to like founders, like, what do you need? And then like, we'll just give that to you. And it's not about this traditional like seed round or A round. It's like, I like the idea. Let's make sure we can fund your team for a year and not just survive, but thrive. What does that take? And maybe that's 200K or 400K. And then they do that. And that makes way more sense because that's how you actually get the at bat. You know, it's not, you start from what they need, not from some arbitrary limit.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point of like, why is innovation, why does it have to be done by only people that can afford to live on, you know, that have to live in a house together that's $3K a month, which can't be a nice place up where you're at in like Silicon Valley, right? So it's like you're forcing this, and it's got to be young people that can afford to do this, that can just work 24/7, right? I think there's so much innovation that could still come from people that are a little bit older, right? That might be a little bit more established, that have ideas, but then also have the ability to execute. I think a small team of, you know, maybe people that are like 5 to 7 years into their, you know, into their career, or maybe even a little bit farther. I mean, maybe go even higher than that. You can sometimes do a lot more with those teams. And it's just because they have the experience, right? It doesn't mean that they're going to do better, right? The competitive advantage of being, I think, younger is just, hey, I could work 20 hours where you can only work 10 because you have family, or you have take your kids to a soccer game or whatever you're doing. But it doesn't mean that the person that's only working 10 can't work smarter. And so I think there's a gap there of innovation that's not there. And like you're saying, like 120K, it's not, that's even not enough. right? It's like, it's just, and I mean, I know the game for a lot of those accelerators is bring as many people in as possible, because, you know, the more people and the more ideas, someone's going to figure it out, versus saying, hey, if every cohort only had, like for a Techstars, it's like, hey, instead of 10, we're going down to 5, and we're going to take that money and we're going to double down on everyone there. It's more upfront work, but I think it's such a guessing game sometimes with startups that it's like, you just don't know. You can't interview a bunch of people for 2 months and know which ones they're going to be successful. You're just guessing.
Yeah, which is why it's a numbers game, and I get that too. Yeah. It's not about just kind of like, you know, crapping on everything that exists right now. I think these programs are good, and I'm glad they exist. It's just kind of like, let's keep moving for sure. The thing that I think seems craziest to me is just the concept of ramen profitability. Like, I just reject that. I don't know if I can swear on this. Can I swear on this?
Yeah, that's fine.
Ramen profitability is the dumbest. Yeah, okay. All right. It's ramen profitability to me is the dumbest fucking concept. Like, that's so insulting. And I get that where it came from, and it's with students, and that's fun when you're like in a certain circumstance, but we should not be using that term anymore. That is insane. That's so dangerous. Living as a startup founder or any kind of entrepreneur should not be dangerous. It should not be precarious. And also, to me, you know, that strikes me as sort of like how, you know, big employers will be like, oh, you know, you don't want more money. That's going to like create too many issues for you. It's like, wait, what? That's an insane thing to tell someone. This is the equivalent of that. It's just like, why would you tell someone that they'll work better when they only have a limited amount of capital? We also just know from like 100 years of psychological studies that people work better when they don't fear for their lives. Yeah. So you shouldn't be just surviving, you should be thriving. And I think you can absolutely, they're not mutually exclusive concepts. You can have someone who's paid a decent wage and has a good living and still works really, really hard. Working hard doesn't come from your back being against the wall and not knowing you know where the next meal is going to come from. That's an insane concept to me.
Yeah, the amount of stress that you could take on is only, there's only so much. And I mean, it's like founder conflict and stress and anxiety and money. I mean, these are the reasons that a lot of these products, they fail and these companies fail. It's not because the product didn't have the ability to start getting traction. It just takes a long time. I mean, I think people forget that like an Uber was out in like 2009, right? But it didn't even come close to becoming mainstream until like 2013, 2014. I mean, now we're talking 5 or 6 years ago when they were starting to expand city to city. And it's because it takes time. It took 4 years to get that adoption. Like, you know, if you're 2.5 years into your startup right now, or 3 years into your startup right now, and you're thinking to yourself like, or you're thinking like, man, I'm going to do this. And say you're 6 months in your startup and you're like, shit, 2.5 years from now, I'm still going to be in the same position I am today. Like, that doesn't feel good. Right. So it's like, if you're just bleeding money and you're not, and you don't have personal runway to get there, you're not going to get there. And so the world will never see that product. Right. Or maybe not see it the way you want to execute it. And that's just, I think that's kind of what we're getting at, is there's a gap there.
Yeah. Big gap for sure. And I think it's an exciting time to see that there are new modes of funding these things. It's still a little precarious, but like I would definitely encourage them, and I wouldn't discourage them. Like if someone wanted to do something with frontier tech or something really, really crazy, I would tell them like, absolutely go for it. Right. And then just try to find those people who share your crazy and just start closing checks as you can. And if you don't know how to do that, DM me or someone like me or you and just be like, hey, how do I do this? Like literally, what am I supposed to do here? You know?
Yeah. I think that is underestimated too, is just reaching out to founders and just like the standard, hey, look at people that are maybe 5 years ahead of you and just a simple reach out, something simple that you can respond to quickly in an email. And that's why it's like, as a founder, I like to try to find investors who were founders, and they can feel what you feel and they understand. If someone's never started something from scratch, it's almost impossible to kind of create that rapport and have them understand what it's like to go through what you're going through. So it's like any solid founder that actually is worth their grain of salt will definitely, we'll reach out to you and be like, hey, this is what I would do. I would take 15 minutes with anyone that reached out to me at any point. And I don't think I'll ever stop doing that, because you need to give people the light of, you can do this. You can do it.
Yeah.
You just have to.
Yeah. And a lot of people will do that. Yeah. I think there's so many stories of people over time who are really, you know, well-known people. Steve Jobs used to just respond to random emails that he'd get, and you know, a lot of people who are in positions of power do that stuff. There's a lot of interesting stuff tied into how to fund startups. I think at the end of the day, you just need to find people who share the crazy. Like I hear a lot of people say the thing you were just saying about, you know, I have a preference for getting investors who are former operators or founders themselves. And I do think it's good if you can have people like that investing in you, because they'll kind of get the journey. I think at the same time, that is a little bit of gatekeeping in itself. You know, I know, for example, you're not saying like only take investors like that, but there are people like that who would say like only take investors who are former operators or founders. And that's just strange to me, because if someone thinks what you're doing is really, really cool and they want to write you a check, like let them do that. You know, it's your job to be smart with the money, not their job. Like, yes, technically, right, they need to make investments, but you're the one who has to build the company and the product and the business. And so you want you to be smart, not them to be smart. But also, taking checks from people, I think a lot of people who aren't startup founders don't really understand what that is. Like they've never done that before. They don't understand, like, you can just use like safes and convertible notes, like you were talking about earlier. You can just you can literally, if someone could just DM you right now on Twitter and they were like, hey Joe, like I want to put 25K in your company, you'd be like, okay, cool, like let's do a safe and I'll take it right now, and you can wire it over. It's just boom, done. You know, you don't have to go like you have a ton of legal work done and have a bunch of lawyers. I mean, these things help, but you can do that. But again, like people just don't know that. And if you don't know that, then how are you going to possibly be successful in doing that? You know, there's so much information gatekeeping even.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point. I think the point I was trying to make is almost like humbleness is really the only prerequisite. Right. Like if you're, especially with something like what you're working on in frontier tech, which, you know, is a new word now, I'm just picking it up and I love it, is, you know, if you're humbly trying to get involved because you want to learn, that is it. That's all you need, is people that are saying, okay, I'm not, you know, maybe I have an operator, I don't understand anything, but I think this is cool. I think what you're doing is interesting. I want to try to get involved. Like that's by all means, like, you know, hop on board. And yeah, I think, you know, as far as like almost like a rolling round. I think it's like going through this last time too. It was like there was, especially COVID, I think changed a lot of this with like, you know, people try to use that kind of like fall deadline of like, hey, the round's closing, you know, you better hop on board. It's almost like, well, the round never has to close or never has to open. It just can just keep going. If finds something interesting, it's like maybe the valuation goes up, maybe it goes down, maybe like it just kind of depends. If you find people that are interesting, like you're saying, this paperwork is simple now and people could fill it out. You come to an agreement and you move forward, and that's an okay thing. But yes, before it used to be like, hey, I'm raising this round, it's closing, we got these people in, let's do this. And it's like, then you feel like I'm raising and then I'm done. And then it's like, well, wait, you know, now I have to think about cash flow again. I'm gonna have to raise again in the future potentially. It's like, shit, now I have to tell people it's open again 4 months later. What's going on there? And it's like, it's just a weird way, I think, to think about it. But
it's hard too. I always say that the best way to be a first-time founder is be a second-time founder. You know, there's so much you can't know, and investors and partners and a lot of people will intellectually flex on you in those situations because they know that they have the leverage, because they know how to do it. You know, it's still like, we don't talk about this nearly enough in the Bay Area. Like investors, for example, like traditional VC investors, you know, they see, let's call it 1,000 deals a year, and then they do maybe 10 to 20. You as a founder, especially a first-time founder, you do 0 deals a year. You see 0 deals a year. You see your one deal, and you have no idea what that process looks like. This, by the way, is why there is so much investors investing in other investors when they're first-time founders. It's actually like kind of this cheat hack path that you can use. Like if you know you want to be a founder or entrepreneur at some point, you just go work at an investment fund, at a VC fund. And then when you start your company, you'll probably guarantee to have at least a few of the partners there who want to invest, and they'll get some of the other people to invest. It's pretty messed up, but it works. And I see it happen a lot. But also, you know, if you don't know that stuff, you know, how could you possibly be expected to perform well?
That's like such an insider baseball right there of just knowing and then having access to that and getting access to it, which is, again, the gap, right? Like being a second-time founder, the gap to even get there, whether it's a startup that worked or the startup that didn't work. There are no failures. It's still a huge gap and a risk. And, you go through a life cycle as far as like your ability and like maybe getting the energy to go after it again. And some people never go after it again because they get burned so hard. So it's like, man, even to kind of push through too. And now I think for you, I mean, shit, if we count the first computer hardware, company, I mean, you're now racking all the way in there. You're 5 or 6, I don't know at this point, but.
Well, that was the funny thing about Bebo too with our last company is, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Bebo was actually an idea lab. And so we iterated through, 10 or 20 different products over the years from Blab, which was, kind of the predecessor to a lot of products like StreamYard and products like this.
Yeah, I remember you talking about Blab. That was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. That was a while back, but maybe it was more than that. I don't know. That's awesome.
4 or 5, yeah. And that was fun, right? I mean, that was like a video social network, and got a few million users, on it, and ultimately pivoted it to some other stuff. And we went through just tons of different products. And so I think the point as a founder is you want to try to get as many at-bats as possible, because there is no school for this stuff and there's no practice. If you want to be a great doctor, you go to med school. If you want to be a great athlete, you probably start playing sports from a young age, and you get practice and you have coaches and you have teams, and then you do other practices, and like you're constantly learning from people who are better than you how to do it. If you want to be a great entrepreneur, what do? You basically just start something and then fail at it, and maybe you reach out to some mentors and stuff, but there's nowhere near as much of either an academic schooling for it, outside of kind of MBAs and some entrepreneurship 101 stuff. And there's not really practice in the same sense that there is in athletics, where you're literally like all day, every day practicing the things that you want to do. And that's why I think a lot of these, concepts that we've gotten in the past couple of years from, what was it, Bill Walsh's book, who he wrote Score Takes Care of Itself. And some of these books, like people are starting to codify a lot of really powerful concepts in business, and they have been for a long time. High output management, like still an iconic book to this day. But in terms of like, how do you go from 0 to 1? That is also a concept that came from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. Like we're to your point about cryptos in the first inning, like startups are really still in their first inning too. And boy, crypto, oh my gosh, for sure still in its first inning. I think it's, for guys like you who've been in it for a while, it's easier to see. But to a lot of people in the rest of the world, like I'm from Minnesota originally. My family, when I talk to them in Minnesota about crypto, like they still have no idea, right? They literally don't even know how to pronounce it. Is it Ethereum or is it Ethereum? Like I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
and
that's
so to them, it's a crazy concept still.
Yeah, no, we're still super early with some of this stuff, and it's. And there are no experts in crypto. I mean, it's like, if you were mining Bitcoin back in 2011 or whatnot, like you're been in the longest, like that's the longest. Imagine if like the oldest doctor was 30, right? Like 10 years in the workforce. It's like, there are no experts. Right. And so it's like, it's such an early industry that you can jump in and you can be an expert, quote unquote, whatever we want to call that, in the industry pretty quickly, because no one else is looking at it. And so it's a risk, but it's also just and it's a global industry. I mean, we have people coming in on DM speaking all sorts of different languages. There's 200 different countries that people come to our site from, and localization is a huge deal. Telegrams groups are a huge deal. Like social is a huge deal. And, it's just like another democratization of like technology and the beginning of something new that, potentially like you're saying there, I mean, you can create a microeconomy that would say, hey, we're only going to invest in, artificial limbs, if that's the correct terminology to use for it. And, we're going to have this token, and this token means that you have access to, potentially some ecosystem that these, the arms will create. And you might have 5 million people that can invest $1 or invest 50 cents in a microtransaction that you couldn't do that before. That's still a substantial amount of money to be invested and to be now passionate follower of what you're doing. And that's the most interesting part, is the community that's being created globally, not just in one space, and of people that want to contribute. We talk to projects all the time on our live stream where they'll be out there and be like, we have 20 or 30 people that work on like localizing Twitter channels in Spanish, and they're not paying anyone. They're not even paying these people. These people are just contributing because of how excited they are about the technology. And sure, they buy it. They buy some, but they're using their own money to buy it, and then they're contributing. It's like think about if you bought a Nike shirt and then you just drove around with like huge Nike stuff all over your car and you're just yelling at people like, buy Nike, you need so much Nike. No one would ever do that. What industry has that?
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the cool part that I get to watch.
If you grew up on the internet, I think you kind of understand that more natively. You know, when we were growing up and there was sort of that Wild West era of the internet, the crypto feels a little bit like now. That it's easier to understand, like, oh yeah, there are people who just contribute to things for free. Like I used to participate in tons of forums and message boards and, you know, all that kind of stuff and help build stuff. Like
I was an admin on the Rainbow Six online gaming network forum back in the day before someone hacked my shit and like stole my password. Cause I like, you know, this is back, God, this is 15. So this is probably 99, 2000 or somewhere around there. I was like one of the first people on my block to have like Ethernet, like a cable modem. And it was like, I was like, I don't know if you know this, I was like legitimately like top 10, like Rainbow Six clans, like in the world back then. I don't know.
How have you never mentioned? No, I didn't know that. How is that not like a leading thing in your Twitter bio?
This was way back in the day though. This was like the original, like Tom Clancy, like, I mean, I probably like my fingers, like on a keyboard could still do like a strafe and like throw a frag. Like still to this day, I probably have like the muscle memory of how to do that. But yeah, I guess you're like gaming and contributing. Like there was no reason, like I would create little like flash backgrounds to like, for all the different, you know, things that were out there in the different clans. But you're right. That's like an economy within an economy of people that are passionate because they love what it gives them. And so that's crypto.
Wow. Well, evidently we need to run some squads in Warzone. I didn't even know this was a thing, but I don't know if you know this, but I built a gaming company for the past several years before Adam Lim. So
no, I know. And I didn't know how much into gaming you were until I saw you were at a lot of like the conferences and stuff like that and building a piece there. And in the crypto space, it was very gamer heavy as well, like at the beginning. And it was just, you know, something kind of like called a non-fungible token, which is like, you know, basically having a token that is, you know, a collectible or from a game or something that you're kind of collecting and putting out there. I mean, gamers were very early on in our space and they are some of the piece that push this forward. That's why a lot of the chat groups are on Discord or, you know, something like Telegram. It's because that the overlap there is pretty heavy. So
I wanted to go back to one thing you just touched on, which is a little bit of a hard turn from gaming. But you were talking about the sort of like lost productivity and creativity from a lot of this stuff. You know, you're saying like, imagine if you were a 30-year-old doctor and you were the most experienced doctor in the world. You know, that'd be crazy concept. Yeah. But like that level of craziness is what I see when I look at how the world treats health and life and death today. Like to me, that's what I mean when I say like I want to live forever and I want to cure death, because first of all, it should just be our choice. Like I should be able to choose when I die, in my opinion. But also just massive lost creativity and innovation and productivity and creation because people die. Like we're basically restarting everything every 80 years on average, but it's just rolling because everyone's individually dying at their own 80 years. And then just thankfully, basically, you know, we have populations of people. So we don't lose that knowledge because people can put it online or they can spread it to other people. But like, if there were 10 human beings on the planet and they all lived in 10 different areas, not near each other, there would never be innovation. The only reason there's innovation is because we have populations of people and things in aggregate generally move forward. But it's sort of like cell death inside your body. Like humans are just dying constantly and everything is only moving forward in this aggregate. It seems crazy to me that like, why do we accept that? Like, not even from like a freedom of choice perspective, but just think of how much better we could be doing with people who gain, you know, when you're 50, when you're 80 years old, you're going to have so much more knowledge about how the world works and so much more wisdom, ideally, right? As long as you're not being a jerk. But like, imagine what you could have in 200 years or 1,000 years or 100,000 years, the things that you could learn and, you know, create because you have finally, you know, so much more visibility into how the world works and how products work and how science works, and how thought works and philosophy. There's so much we lose constantly because we're just restarting over and over. And when I look around and see like Congress is slow, for example, like that's one of the reasons why, because it's stacked with a bunch of old people who just die constantly every 5 or 10 years. It's so crazy.
Yeah. You said a couple interesting things there. It's like, first off, imagine what a startup would look like from someone who's 500 years old, right? If you're 500 years old, what would you be creating, right? With that knowledge, which is insane, I think, to think about. And then also, as far as like passing knowledge on, I mean, like YouTube wasn't, like, think about how many YouTube videos there are created and added every day. Like, what does YouTube look like in 500 years? Like, how much content?
Oh my God.
Like that, to think about some of those things is insane. Because it's like, we didn't have the ability up until even like 10 years ago to pass this. Like, I think it's like someone like a Gary Vee who talked about this one time with like documenting. And like, he likes that he's documenting all of these lessons that he kind of talks about to people and this inspiration so that his kids can see it in case he gets hit by a bus tomorrow. Right. And so it's like, I mean, do you think that like that consciousness side to you? I mean, people talk about it today. It's like, hey, I've written enough Gmail emails in my life that it knows exactly. Like, and then all I'd have to do is like recreate my voice with like a couple, like, they can recreate your voice now for, I think, you know, all you have to do, you can like go with like 5 recording sessions and they can basically get everything, like any word that you would say, like you'd say all the letters, all the numbers, make a couple of sounds, inflections, and they can create it. You basically could recreate Tyler today with your Gmail, right?
Yeah. I mean, not literally today. Yeah. I mean, it will happen, right? Obviously it will happen. Again, you just look at where we started and where we are now and just keep trending that, and we'll get there at some point. It seems to me more like, do you know what the ship of Theseus is?
No, I don't.
So the ship of Theseus, very, very relevant to sort of the Stardust background we have here, actually. So the ship of Theseus is a philosophical problem, basically. And the problem is, okay, so there's this 2,000 years ago, there's this boat, Theseus's boat, this guy. He had this wooden boat, and then they take this boat and they put it in a museum. And then over time, some of the masts start to rot and the side starts to rot and the bow starts to rot, and they keep replacing pieces of it over time. And over hundreds of years, now every part at some point has rotted and been replaced by some new wooden piece. So the question is that the same boat or is that a new boat? Because it's literally has none of the original parts, but it was replaced slowly over time, and also it still looks the same. But the point of the philosophical problem is not to like get too in the weeds and how that relates to consciousness, but just to say like, yes, indeed, things can be both the same and different as they change over time. With consciousness specifically, I think there's actually like a really easy answer to this question. Or like uploading your consciousness to the cloud, for example, like kind of the thing you're talking about. Like, say there was some, you know, Google container that I could put my brain up into, and then I could live in the cloud. Okay. Well, if you basically just did that instantly, what you would do is you would have created a copy of yourself. You wouldn't have yourself. You would still be in your own brain, and you would have a copy of yourself in the cloud. Because unless you destroy the original, there's now 2 of you.
Yeah,
but it's just not. Yeah, it's not 2 of you, right? It's just a clone. Exactly. It's a same ingredients, but it is an entirely new thing now. But I think if you think about this problem, this ship of Theseus, the point is actually consciousness is experienced over time. And so if you were to say, for example, upload yourself to the cloud, but you did it slowly at a rate where you could consciously perceive it happening. So it's sort of like uploading Joe to the cloud, and you have like 100% in your body and 0% in the cloud to start. And then it goes 99% in your body and 1% in the cloud. And then now you perceive that. You, Joe, perceive that you are also partially in the cloud. It's just part of who you are. And then you slowly make the transition over until you're only in the cloud, but you were able to perceive it, and therefore you are the same consciousness at that point. But if you just do it instantly and you can't perceive it, then it's not a consciousness transfer. So I think that gets into some really crazy territory. I think also the next logical question after that is, how quickly can you make the perception of it? Can you make the perception of it effectively instant? So then you could instantly upload yourself and you would still be the same person. So there's like, we haven't thought about that stuff nearly enough.
Yeah, no, and that's actually exactly what I was kind of thinking about, was the consciousness level of it. And now you have these two things, right? And it's almost like two boats at the same location, and even a 1 degree, offset is going to end you up in a completely different place with enough time.
Mm-hmm.
With time, you're in infinitely different places, right? With just the beginning of the starting of just 1 degree difference. And so like that is it's going to be an interesting problem if we end up trying to solve it at some point, because it's, it's also like the reality to another human. If you're if another human, you're 6 sigma 99.99999% of the way there, can you tell the difference, right? Like, if you're in a Ferrari and the Ferrari's firing on almost all cylinders, but you're used to being in a Ford Fiesta, like, can you even tell the acceleration difference? Because, so if someone's uploaded into the cloud and it's really good, is it going to be, is the other human, because we're going to be so nascent at that point, even going to be able to tell, unless they also are part of it.
That's the new Turing test for sure. We need a name for that. But I think, this is just personal opinion, I just think humans have way too much of a human-centric view of this stuff. And if you step all the way back, you say, okay, humans are animals. There are thousands of species of animals on this one planet. There were also thousands of species of animals before we existed. There were dinosaurs. Like, literally, there was another dominant species on this planet millions of years before us. Humans didn't exist. If you step back and take that view and you say, okay, that's one planet amongst one solar system, in one galaxy, in one universe, and just roll with the punches here for a second. Just say, let's just assume statistically there is other life in the universe. And let's say that the universe has been around for 14 billion years, and humans in their modern form have existed for about 10,000 years socially, 100,000 years evolutionarily. That's an extremely small amount of time that humans have existed on this planet, in this universe. And my point here is not to get into the standard, midnight dorm room conversation of like, oh, were there other life forms? Is there other life in the universe? Like, let's just assume there is for a second. The point is to say, assume that there is more advanced life in the universe, far beyond what we are. And so our consciousness, when we talk about consciousness, when people say consciousness, we're defining it as if it's this like one objective thing that exists, when in reality, what we're talking about is one species' current perception after a few thousand years of evolution on one planet. And like, what would we define consciousness as 1 million years from now if we still exist? And what will humans look like then? And it would be defined very differently. So I think consciousness, I would actually say, does not exist. Like, in its objective definition that we give it, it is a constantly moving target, and it can have many different implementations, and it will change even for humans over time. And it has changed for humans over time. Over the past several thousand years, we didn't have this level of consciousness always, just like many other animals don't now. I mean, it's not even just about like, improving versus degrading. It's just changing. I think a lot of people, last thing I'll say on this is like, I think a lot of people think of evolution as like an upgrade. Evolution is not an upgrade. We use this term as if it's synonymous for upgrading. It's not. It's just adapting to your environment so that you're better at surviving in it. You're just changing constantly to suit the environment. Evolution is not like X-Men, where it's like, now I've got laser eyes and I can control,
if that's what the environment called for, then maybe that's the way you would go. But if the environment's calling for something else, maybe you are downgraded, right? Maybe if there's only, say, like everyone got wiped away, now there's only 50 people on the planet, we're going to look much different 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 years in the future in that scenario versus the amount of oxygen in the environment. I think they talk a lot about the amount of oxygen, and it can sustain a larger life force. And that's why bugs were bigger, plants were bigger, everything was bigger, different amount of oxygen, right? And so there's all of these different factors playing into it that, like you're saying, it's not always going up. Maybe it's going sideways, maybe it's going down. We just don't know.
Yeah, I think there was just an article in the last week that revealed they found evidence of primates that were 3 meters tall. Like, that's gigantic.
That's Bigfoot.
Literally. Some of our primate predecessors were Bigfoot.
Bigfoot exists.
10, 12 feet tall. Yeah. And, think of humans as like, could we be that tall at some point? I remember the first time I ever went to the Great Wall of China when I was studying in China. and we were walking on top of the wall. And if you haven't been to the Great Wall of China, have you ever been there?
I have not.
So there's this really interesting experience that everyone almost immediately goes through, which is you start walking on the top of the Great Wall of China, and you have to go through all these alcoves that are at each, stopping point. And when you go through them, they're about 4 feet, 4.5 feet tall. So you have to duck quite a bit to get in them. And I remember when I was studying there, I asked my professors, like, why are these all so short? Was this like for more protection? And she said, no, that's how tall people were when they built it. It's like, yep. Oh, right. Because nutrition wasn't nearly as good as it is now. Of course. Okay. It makes sense.
Right.
Sort of just a, mind-blowing concept.
Yeah, no, and when you think about the different subset of people, and how close, travel used to be very difficult, right? Like getting across America used to be like, we're going to lose 10% of the people on the way. It's like, imagine if you're like, hey, I'm going to New York, like it's going to take 3 months and like half of you going to die. Just, and that's like not even that many people ago. That's like, and so to think about like 1,000 and 2,000 years ago, there's people in certain areas that evolve slightly to be different, right? I mean, the evidence is right in front of our faces, and that's what always like mind boggles me when people have, whether it's a philosophical argument about some of these things, is like the evidence, you actually have it. It's right here, right? People look different. Done. Game over. That ends the argument right there. And so it's like people, and certain people adapt to different things, and it takes time. And now that we're all kind of coming together, it's like you would think that, two things coming together sometimes would make a stronger, more better thing on the outset. But if you merge these two things maybe too early and there's too many differences in them, it's almost like kind of mating two animals that don't coalesce. It doesn't work, right? So I'm not saying, humans are biologically very close, but if someone from a very obscure area in the world were to marry and have a child with someone from another very obscure area in the world, it doesn't necessarily mean that the offspring from that is going to be something that maybe is, like you're saying, a better, stronger version. It could potentially there could be other issues in there. And I and I'm not going to get into there's some stories that I know of people that have had these things happen, and they're from two very, very different areas. And there's there's tumors, there's other things that they're battling in their life, and they think it's because of how different they are. But a little anecdotal, not as much evidence there, but it's something to kind of think about,
Absolutely. I think it is something to think about, and I think just tying it back to everything we've been talking about in this conversation, human body 2.0, crypto, all these things at the same time are very recent experiments, extremely recent, last 10, 20 years experiments. And in the grand scheme of human history, that is a blip inside of a tiny blip inside of an even tinier blip. It is not much time to try these things. And if I could sort of like double down on any one thing that you said in this conversation, by the way, because I really agree with this, not that we have to like double down on something here, but things that are worth doing take time. And in some senses, I think we've over-rotated a little bit in the Bay Area culture to move fast and break things like you're talking about. And that is good. You want to do that. But Pixar doesn't make a movie in 3 months. They take 4 years every time. Uber did not immediately catch on. I remember when Parker Thompson tweeted, I think it was when he was still tweeting as Startup L. Jackson years ago, but he was tweeting about, overnight successes happen sometime between day 2000 and 2500. And you have to put in a lot of time. That doesn't mean delude yourself and lie to yourself that you're working on something while you do it. Make sure you're doing the right thing in the right way. But they're not mutually exclusive concepts.
Yeah, no, great. I think that's a great advice for people that are getting started too, is it's okay that it's going to take time, and there are no failures, and just learning and adapting. And even if you try to do your own startup for the first year, you're going to learn more than you would learn in 5, maybe 10 years, maybe ever working in the same cubicle, right? Like you're going to learn, and you're going to adapt and find new things. And I think that's a great piece of advice, that good things take time. Look at what you're working on, and look at the time it's going to take to finally get to a place where it can be in the hands of everyone that wants one, right? And hopefully at a price that's affordable for people. And
literally in their hands.
Literally on them. So I think it's a good lesson though for people to know. And it's like building something, like building a beautiful chair, right? Or a nice meal or something. Those small details, that last 5% makes the difference. You know, it makes a difference between something that anyone else can do and how do you make it perfect and special and beautiful for you, and other people will appreciate that. And, you know, we to bring it back to movies, because that's where we started. It's like something like an Avatar, right? James Cameron is, you know, he's going to make 2 through 12 all in the same shot, which is good for him. But, you know, I'm sure that it's going to be the most beautiful cinematic experience that some people will ever see. And I'd rather have it in 5 years than 3 years if he's going to take a shortcut. Right. And it's beautiful things take time, but they're pieces of art that we get to pass, and knowledge that we get to pass to the next generation. And like you're saying, like the longer we can live, the more knowledge that we can pass in a better way, the better off we are entirely as a society. So it's a good lesson, man. Tyler did it out. We did an hour 40.
Woo! You want to do another hour 40? Let's go right now.
I appreciate you doing this, man. I'm going to have to hit the restroom though. I had like 2 coffees before this. I knew we were talking about like your arm, and I was like, all right, Tyler's going to just school me on all this. I need coffee and I need 2 alpha brains. What else do I need? B12, B6. But no, man, I appreciate you hopping on and doing this. And, you know, for everyone listening, this will be on the podcast. I'll toss it on here in the next couple of days. We can get after it, but tell anyone how they can help. How would they get involved? What are you guys looking for? How would people kind of get involved or help right now?
Yeah. First of all, likewise, great. Like, love just talking about this stuff. I love nerding out about this stuff. So this is a fun little nerd out session. Boy, did we cover some stuff too that was well outside of what we're doing. And I love it. This is great. This is why I love talking with you about this stuff, man. This is why you have such a good show here too. Okay. So if people share the crazy, if they want to either find out if they share the crazy or if they know they do, we're just at Adam Limbs everywhere. ATOMLIMBS. And it's, you know, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And definitely, if I had a recommendation, I would say the best thing you can do is join the Facebook group, because we have this incredible Facebook group that's like exclusive updates about what we're doing. So it's actually the only place where we give like behind the scenes concept art and exclusive updates before anywhere else, as well as like invites to come to the Adam headquarters and play with the arm. Not even whether you're an amputee or not, you should absolutely like come out after when it's safe after COVID and everything. But like that's the place to be for sure. And if people just are like super against Facebook for some reason.
And how do they find the group? They just at Adam Limbs, and then at part of the page you can join the group.
Yeah, I mean, if you just search Adam Limbs on Facebook, you'll find it. Otherwise, it's facebook.com/group/Adam Limbs. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Tyler. I really appreciate it. I'm going to end the broadcast and we'll chat for a second backstage.
Dope.